I'm Vikas Jain, and with me is Jonathan Unger from Salesforce IT, a senior software engineer. Both of us will be walking you through Identity Connect, a software that connects Salesforce implementation to Active Directory. Okay, for Safe Harbor, most of it that I'll be talking is production ready information, but if during the Q&A I might be talking about forward-looking, those statements should not be used for any purchasing decisions. So again, I'm Director of Product Management for Salesforce Identity. Identity Connect is one of the components that I manage apart from other aspects of identity. Jonathan Unger is an senior software engineer from our Salesforce IT organization who has implemented Identity Connect to internally deploy AD authentication for our Salesforce orgs. So we'll be talking about the problem, the use cases. We'll be going through a demo of setting up Identity Connect live and then go over a case study by Salesforce ID. So what's the first problem? The first problem is that, let's say Bob joins the sales organization and he needs to look up all the accounts they need to service. So he doesn't have access to Salesforce. He needs to, first he files an IT ticket. Sarah, Bob's manager, approves it, goes to the IT help desk, Salesforce administrator then creates a user in Salesforce. Bob gets an email, after which he sets a password and finally is able to get into Salesforce to look up all the accounts he needs to service. And in this process, he loses sometimes multiple days due to the process, and he has to remember yet another password apart from the AD password. Now let's say Bob leaves the company and the AD administrator disables access by disabling Bob's account in AD, but his account in Salesforce is still valid. So AD administrator then notifies the Salesforce administrator to disable the account, which might take some days. Meanwhile, Bob can download the opportunities and account information from the Salesforce One mobile application, which might have a open session because AD session was disabled, but the Salesforce session is still valid. So there might be some data leaks in this process. Now, clearly you want to tie your Salesforce to your AD, but there's a technical problem that your security teams would come back, which is AD is behind the firewall and they won't expose the AD ports outside of the firewall. So in effect, how do I automatically create a user? How do I auto-assign permissions to the user? How do I auto-disable the user upon termination? And how can I authenticate this user against AD so that the user has to remember only one password? Salesforce Identity Connect solves these problems by connecting to Active Directory and acting as a bridge between AD and Salesforce. It automatically creates, update, deletes, or disables user in Salesforce, as well as perform assignments to the authorization constructs in Salesforce, whether it is profile, permission sets, groups, roles, queues. As well as it allows you to perform single sign-on using AD, and being an on-premise software, it solves your firewall challenge. We have many customers using the product today. Brown Foreman did a case study talk on Monday around the same Identity Connect, as well as GSA. We have folks from Michigan here that are deploying the product as well. Right, so let's look at a few use cases. Clearly, we talked about synchronizing the information from AD into Salesforce, creating, updating, disabling user, as well as assigning their permission sets. You can authenticate the user, but more than authentication, you can have a zero sign-in using the Kerberos integration. So really what happens is a user is authenticated onto their desktop, their Windows desktop or Mac, and after that, when they go to the browser and connect to their Salesforce org, it can automatically detect that you're already authenticated with AD and take the user into Salesforce without having to enter a single password. So that we call as zero sign-in. It's mobile ready, so I can go into my Salesforce One application and still use AD authentication to perform that. So let's quickly look at what it really means. I'm going to switch to my iPhone screen here, and let's go to a Salesforce One. And here, as the application comes up, all right, let me try to make sure that it's right. So I'm going to, since I'm already logged in here, I'm going to add a new account here. And you'll notice that there's a cog wheel that I will see at the top right-hand corner. Here, I can enter my org information. So here I'm going to say, well, let's pick up customer.my.salesforce.com. This is my org, which is using Identity Connect for authentication. And what you see is this Identity Connect authentication screen coming up, asking to enter my AD credentials. And let's say now everyone knows the password. You too. All right. Okay, so by entering this AD user ID password, I'm able to now log in into my Salesforce One application. Okay. All right, so one thing to remember there is that if you have enabled your zero sign-in or Kerberos authentication on your desktop, it automatically falls back on your devices that do not support Kerberos to a form authentication that you just saw in the previous demo. Now you can add two-factor authentication to it. So let's say you have your RSA, YubiKey, or other two-factor authentication, or just using the Salesforce own two-factor Salesforce Pound application. You can add that to as a second factor apart from the AD authentication. And Jonathan will be talking about how creatively they have done something similar for the IT use case. This product is not just used for Salesforce, but you can use it for any ISV app, Financial Force, Remedy Force, Aptus, anything that's running on the Salesforce platform. You can have the AD authentication of that application, as well as provisioning. And finally, you can have both the AD authentication as well as enable two-factor authentication for your target apps. So imagine you are going to your Google account, Google for Business, and then Salesforce acts as a pass-through for your AD authentication done through Identity Connect, and finally giving a session of Google. So to give an example, State of Colorado is doing exactly that. Their use cases, they have a Google Apps implementation, and they want to enable two-factor authentication into it using Salesforce, as well as AD authentication. You can connect to multiple Salesforce org using the same instance, so you don't have to really deploy multiple Identity Connect instances. One instance can connect to your sandbox, your production, or multiple production orgs. So let's try to now go and set this up from scratch. All right, so the first thing you have to do is, let me make it bigger. Okay. So the first thing you do is if you have Identity Connect licenses in your organization, you would see this, you would see this subnode in the setup tree called Identity Connect, from where you can download the software. So if I download the Linux version that I'll be running in, I can then just unzip it. So I'm going to unzip it, and it's a very lightweight software, so right now I'm going to run it on my Mac, but typically you would be running on a particular production server. All right, so after unzipping this software, I'm going to set it up. I'll use the default port 8443, but you can change it. It comes with a self-signed SSL certificate. Typically, you would change that before going into production. Now, once I have done this, let me go into this browser window and go to, since it's running on localhost 8443 port, I have typed this onto my browser. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay, because of the self-signed certificate, it gives this warning. Let's begin the setup process. I'm configuring the data source. Now, here I have to enter my Active Directory connection information. So I'm going to enter the host name, port is there. Now, it supports the SSL port of AD, so you can do LDAP-S by uploading a certificate here. For the demo here, I'm just going to use the 389 port. Then I'm going to pass in a DN for an administrator that will be used to connect and validate with AD. Enter the password and the base DN. Now, if you have, let's say, 1,000 users in AD and you only want, let's say, 200 of these users to be synchronized with Salesforce, there are a couple of ways you can do it. One is you can have a particular base DN under which you have all these Salesforce users, or you can do it via a user filter. Here you can add your group information, which users belonging to these groups only need to be synchronized with Salesforce. So there are a couple of ways you can filter this information. Now, once you have done this, I'm going to validate the connection. The validation is successful. Then the next thing I have to do is make sure I assign an AD group for all the administrators of this console. So now it is asking me to log me into the console using AD credentials. So now I'm back into my console here. The next thing, so we completed the AD connection. Next, we have to complete the Salesforce connection. We are going to use OAuth to connect into Salesforce from Identity Connect. For this, what you have to do is go into your Salesforce organization under Create Apps, create a connected app. So in the connected app, the things that you need to make sure is you copy the callback URL that is being displayed in the screen. So I copy this here from here into my connected app and select some OAuth scopes. The main OAuth scope required here is the API access, which I have here. Now, once I do that, I need to copy the consumer key and secret from my Salesforce connected app into Identity Connect. So let's copy this from here. All right, take away an extra space. Consumer secret. And then now I have done the connection with Salesforce. It's asking me to, because it's an OAuth grant, it's asking me to log in as a user. And now, because I'm already logged into this browser session, I didn't have to enter password. Now what it's doing is, using this OAuth connection, it's pulling information from Salesforce. The first thing we have to do is do an attribute mapping. It comes with a default set of mapping, most commonly used mapping, as well as for the mandatory attributes like email and community nickname, etc. What we are going to do is just change the mapping for username. So instead of using mail attribute of AD, we will use SAM account name and do some Java transformation to generate a username. So first thing I do is change mail to SAM account name. And the reason I'm doing that is because, as you know, in Salesforce, usernames need to be unique, right? And we know that SAM account name is an attribute that's always unique in Active Directory. So I pick this SAM account name mapping and go into transformation script, and here source is my SAM account name. I'm going to add a suffix to make it an email format for my username. As you can see an example result here, how this transformation will produce the result. So I'm going to make sure this transformation is saved. So before I can save it, I have to pick a profile that needs to be assigned to this user. So here what I'm going to do is, for my system administrator, any user who belongs to the VJIC admins group will get the system admin profile, and everyone else, I'll use a default profile of identity user. So what it really means is, here I can do, based on the AD group membership, the users get assigned to a particular profile. To keep things simple for now, I said a user in AD who belongs to the VJIC admins group gets a sysadmin profile. Everybody else gets an identity user profile. So all this profile information is being pulled from Salesforce via the APIs. If you create new profiles, you can come here and just click on this update now to get the new profile. Now you see other things have opened up. I can add permission set mapping. So I can say, well, let's take a VP permission set and map it to the VP group here. So I'm going to also automatically get the permission set assigned if the user belongs to the VP AD group. Okay, let's now go into the sync tab and look at here. What you do is you first analyze the information. What it does is it pulls information from Salesforce, from AD, and then tries to find the links based on the default association rule. So here the rule says, well, based on your email address, or if you find first name, last name to be matched, think that these users are the same. So I see that there are 2 users in AD that match the Salesforce, but there are 67 other users who are just in Salesforce that do not have any corresponding AD users, right? These are kind of orphan users. You can go and then delete them. Someone has created directly in Salesforce. So what we'll do is, as a quick test, we'll first select one user and do a single user sync by clicking this sync selected record. So when I click on this, it's syncing information from AD into Salesforce. And this is a quick test before you want to perform. Let's say you have 1,000 users. You perform a single user sync to make sure your rules are perfect, and then perform a full user sync. So you can see that the single user sync was successful on the right hand side after sync information is provided. Now you can just click on the sync now, and it will perform the sync for all the users. All right, it gives, and then we'll go to the reports tab and look at what happened. All right, so SAML configuration is automatic. By clicking this button, behind the scenes it creates a single sign-on settings on Salesforce. Reports, you go to provisioning, and here you see that I can look at the success, all the users that were created in Salesforce or not created. Okay, so as you saw that within 5-10 minutes I was able to set the product up, configure it, and I can now use it. So let's quickly log this user in. All right, I'm going to go to this my domain identity demo. All right, so by default it's showing me my user ID password box from Salesforce. Let's first change it to the AD authentication. So for that I go to my domain, and over here from login page I select Identity Connect. Now once I do that, what you'll notice is it now automatically redirects to my Identity Connect instance. Now here I can log in using my AD credentials, and now boom, I'm in Salesforce. All right, so let's now look at what Jonathan has deployed, how Jonathan has deployed Identity Connect for the Salesforce IT use cases.
Sure.
So you want to introduce yourself first about your background?
Sure. So I'm Jonathan Unger. I work for the Salesforce IT department in the infrastructure applications team. And what that team does is we own Active Directory for all of our internal users, our employees and contractors. We own the access to most of our cloud applications, which are increasingly incorporated into our single sign-on architecture. So our employees can go through a one-stop shop of a single Salesforce org and get access to everything else. That is also moving into identity and access management, which I'll talk about a little bit here today. We also own our virtual desktop infrastructure and a few other things. So applications, basically internal apps is what we are. And I've been in IT for, I don't know, going on 16 years. The identity thing fell in my lap a little bit. I was introduced to Chuck Mortimer, who works with Vikas a few years ago, and we have been steadily working towards making Salesforce IT use our own product more and more. We're going to drink our own champagne, which is awesome. So this is our previous architecture where we had third-party products that you might see here. And we did have some two-factor authentication associated here using RSA Secure ID to get access from Active Directory into various applications. And on the right is essentially the same architecture, but we have kind of switched to our own champagne here in the middle, and again getting access for our internal Active Directory users into all of these various cloud applications that we use, and saving quite a bit of money in the process. Yes, no, maybe?
Not working?
Yeah, it doesn't like me. Did I do something magical with the cursor?
Or not? It looks like
is that Adobe update trying to steal your thunder?
Okay. All right. Let's.
It's interesting.
Okay. Well, let's give a couple of minutes to just reset this.
You're just going to give me that. So one of the things that happened recently that caused me to have to figure out a couple of new things is that Salesforce acquired ExactTarget not too long ago. And when that happened, IT was given the mandate of incorporate all their users, give them access to all of our systems, but we don't want to actually assimilate these folks. We're not going to force them to use Salesforce machines. We're going to let them keep their Active Directory domain and their user accounts, but we want you to give them access to all the cloud apps. You can do that, right? Well, that sort of complicated things considerably. This was about the time that Identity Connect was coming out in production, and I realized this is a perfect use case for Identity Connect. Instead of our single ping server, let's put Salesforce Identity Connect on each of those domains and let those users with their respective AD credentials get common access to a single Salesforce org, which we then use as a SAML and OAuth identity provider to all of the other applications, our other Salesforce orgs and Google Drive and everything else. So and I'm waiting for Vikas to show this slide. So we did one thing that's a little bit not out of the box. The out of the box behavior would have been that users would hit that Salesforce org, and because we had two different Identity Connect implementations, we would have had to have both those boxes checked in setup as auth services into the org. So users would have been presented with a Salesforce login screen that said, tell me which one of these you are, which I thought was great. And when I demoed this to the exec staff, they said, well, we don't really want the ExactTarget users to have to click a different button. We just want everybody to log in with their email address. So we found a way to do that using PingFederic, but it wasn't very pretty, and it wasn't scalable was the main problem.
All right, it was indeed the Adobe update. So.
Aha! Darn you, Adobe. So these were the business requirements. So as I just mentioned, ExactTarget AD domain users should be able to seamlessly log in. In other words, we didn't want them to have to click, oh, I'm this other thing. We just wanted it to work, which is a little tricky. We wanted to access, we've been working on this for a while. We really want to, at least I do and a lot of other folks in Salesforce really want our employees to be able to access all this stuff that's in the cloud without having to be connected to our internal network, even though they're authenticating with their AD account. We obviously want to automate user management. This is really getting into identity and access management. And again, cutting off all access immediately on user termination. Somebody in the help desk disables that AD user. I don't want to have to worry about their access downstream. And again, this is getting into how our single sign-on trust between these different applications is really moving into a world of that central authentication Salesforce org becoming an identity and access management database, an identity warehouse for all our users. So I think I mentioned a few of the limitations with the existing solution. We came up with a way to let it work using email address, but again, it certainly wasn't going to scale if we did the same thing again. If we had another merger acquisition and said, let's let these 2,000 users keep their AD credentials, it was going to really not scale well. We're already using our own products. We're using Salesforce as this identity hub to all of these applications. We want to use it as an identity database. Why wouldn't we use the product that's purpose-built for this instead of somebody else's? And that saves us a bunch of money because we're not paying this third-party vendor for a fairly expensive product, but some very minimal licensing costs for the Identity Connect product. So here's some of our before situation. Users have to be connected to VPN to do anything, which, you're trying to access cloud apps and you've got to be on the internal network. It's a little bit backwards. It's extra annoying on a mobile device, no doubt. The additional two-factor support in the third-party vendor product was not implemented very well. It just worked very poorly, and the only thing that really worked for us out of the box, they had support for X509. Couldn't really find a viable use case for that for our users. RSA security just didn't work very well. It wasn't actually their fault, but it didn't work well. And the custom solution, I think I already mentioned this, with the users from two different AD domains logging in with their email address, had a potential single point of failure and really didn't scale well. So future state is users no longer required to be connected to VPN. They can either be connected to VPN if they happen to be, or they're already sitting at their desk in the office. That's great. They can log in through Identity Connect, like Vikas just showed you. They can do IWA, Integrated Windows Authentication with Kerberos, or they can be anywhere, and we'll just ask them to do a two-factor authentication using our own time-based one-time password rolling code in addition to their AD password. Because we have an Identity Connect instance per AD domain, now we can scale as much as we want. Anytime we want to add another Active Directory domain into this mix, we don't need any kind of trust between those domains or anything else. We simply put an Identity Connect server on that domain, hook it up to our central identity org, and those users are logged in, and we can now give them access to all these other apps. Before, as far as user provisioning goes, we didn't really have any ability to sync permission sets. The vendors' release cycles were what they were, and we just kind of had to put stuff on their request list and wait for it. Didn't have very good logging and reporting functionality out of the product, and it certainly wasn't very user-friendly. You really had to get in the command line to look at a log file to figure out problems with provisioning. And little extensibility for creating custom solutions really means it was a hard-baked third-party Java product, and it wasn't really designed to be terribly extensible. You could do it, and they were willing to help us write custom Java code, but it was an expensive and difficult proposition. Afterwards, we have absolutely no problem, as you just saw Vikas's demo, with mapping both permission sets and profiles to Active Directory groups, automatically synchronized in the background. If we want to add a new one, we just create the AD group, create the permission set or the profile in the org, and go into Identity Connect, and I hook them up, and it's done. We're readily engaged with the product team because we're all part of the same company. So when we say, actually, we wish it did this, we're now helping. We're basically IT as being a customer of our own platform, and we're helping to drive the product forward. And then we have a very rapid iteration cycle, which is great. It's got excellent reporting functionality. That tab that Vikas mentioned kind of went by pretty quick, but there's a reports tab in Identity Connect. It'll tell you exactly what's going on with your user provisioning. And it's really extensible. The REST API in Identity Connect lets you build, if the functionality is not there, you can build a custom solution, your own application that can talk to Identity Connect if you want to put your own front end on there or whatever. That's great. So here's our new and improved deployment architecture, roughly. So we've got ExactTarget's domain over here, Salesforce's AD domain over here. There are connections between our two sites, but for purposes of my world of cloud applications, there doesn't need to be. This domain can sit over here behind its firewall with its Identity Connect. Clustered virtual machines with a shared database are sitting over here behind this firewall. This one's sitting over here. There's an OAuth connection to this single internal org, which is the Aloha org, and that org is then functioning as SAML identity provider to all these other orgs, to our other cloud applications, and so forth. So users in this domain are being automatically provisioned by this Identity Connect instance and by this one. Users are able to authenticate. Now, on this diagram, I've got our custom login page that we've hosted on a community on force.com that is doing a username password second factor authentication using Salesforce Pound. And it is making a REST API call. We're figuring out what user you are based on that rolling code. Or if you type in that email address format, we're going to look at that and say, oh, this looks like an ExactTarget user. I better send that call to this URL. But we can authenticate those users using their AD password as one factor, rolling code as another. That's the default behavior, is to redirect users trying to, maybe they're trying to hit an app out here, they get redirected to this page. That's what you get by default. So on your mobile device, whatever, you don't need to be on VPN, you just log into this page. Doesn't stop you if you are a Salesforce domain user and you're sitting at your desk. I don't really want to go through this two-factor business, so I can actually just hit the Identity Connect URL instead and get Kerberos single sign-on, and boom, I'm into Aloha and go about my day. So I really have a zero sign-on there. Let me go back and give me a web browser, and I'll show you what this looks like.
It's not being mirrored, so you have to, oh, it is.
Is it? There you go. Yeah, just give me an incognito window. And in our current implementation, I should have probably mentioned this so no one's confused. And actually, just for kicks, I'm going to start further out. I'm going to start from our internal org that we use for tracking all of our volunteer hours for employees.
It's not connected to the VPN, so.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Let me connect to the VPN quick.
Yeah, sorry. From here, this isn't going to work yet. Do you want to? There we go. All right, now we can pretend I'm at my desk. And I got an email that says, come on, Unger, your foundation volunteering hours this year. Maybe Mark's harassing me. I follow that link in an email, so I got redirected to our internal Aloha org. I then get redirected to Identity Connect. In this case, it's only asking me for username and password because we currently have it configured with a limited set of ranges where we don't require the second factor authentication. If I did, that would look something like, oh, it's not going to do that there either. But take my word for it, it would have a third field on there saying token, and I'd have to get my phone out and put in that code as well. But since we are connected internally, I only had to enter my password. I'm now logged into this org. Well, on the way in, I was actually authenticating to this org, and by default, our employees get this page and have one-click access to all of these apps. And this is, by the way, just a slightly embellished version of something that's built into the platform already. This app launcher is available to everyone. And where did I put I lost the fancy clicker.
You can use the...
Yeah, oh well. Oh, thank you. There we go. Okay, so what's better? We saved a bunch of money by not using a third-party product. It's more flexible and extensible. It's easier to administer. It's a really nice, clean GUI. Improved user experience. Everybody can get access to all these apps much more easily. Improved productivity as a result of all of the above. So what's next? All right, here's some cool stuff. So I didn't even mention on here that one of the other objectives is to really kind of Salesforce One-ify all of this. The Salesforce One interface and Lightning apps are going to be available in desktop browsers in spring, and so we really want to kind of make that Salesforce One experience of Aloha for our employees kind of seamless across the board so that it's not really like a different experience on desktop, it's just different in terms of screen real estate and not the look and feel. But besides that, I'm actually going to quickly go back to that diagram. What we really want to do is we're building an real identity product in here. I don't just want this to be your identity for single sign-on. I actually want this to be the single source of truth of you as an employee and what apps you have access to and what levels of access on those apps. So what we're ultimately going to do is actually turn this arrow around. And instead of automatically provisioning users into this Salesforce org based on your membership in different Active Directory domains, we're actually going to make that Aloha org your identity and essentially your Active Directory account, and at least to some degree what groups you're a member of in that account, what access you have, is really just another service, almost like another cloud app. And we will push that down. And so that will actually be very helpful if somebody in IT like me actually turns out I actually need 3 accounts in this domain and 2 over here, not like a typical user in sales who may just have 1 in one of those domains. That's no problem because all of those 80 accounts are tied back to my single identity. So that's the IAM track that's moving above and beyond just single sign-on. And that brings us this, which is automate user provisioning to on-premise apps. So in addition to stuff out in the cloud, by being able to push into AD, we can control what access you have to internal applications as well. And one other quick thing that's not on here is we're also going to move away from Secure ID to Salesforce Pound using the same token that's registered to users' Aloha account for accessing VPN. So even if you do need, in increasingly rare cases, to get on our internal network, you'll actually basically use the same credentials.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. So, in short, as you saw how Salesforce IT is saving greater than $2 million in ROI, or getting $2 million in ROI through this product, replacing PingFederic, replacing the RSA Secure ID. RSA Secure ID is not yet done, but it's in the process of getting replaced.
And this guy as well.
So let's look at, I hear questions around how does it compare with ADFS, which if you already are using to single sign-on. So first is ADFS does not provide any sort of user synchronization. You can use SAML JIT to do some kind of create and update at login time, but what you don't get is when a user is disabled, that user gets automatically disabled in Salesforce. You have to do that manually. So that's the biggest one, because that also leads to the issue of sessions being live from mobile devices like Salesforce One application, which is using OAuth, a long-lived session. So even if you disable a user in AD, that session is active because they will not be logging in from AD, and that could be a security threat. Okay. The other identity sessions going on, I'm doing another one on Open ID Connect later this afternoon. You can look at all the identity sessions, and I encourage you to attend those. As well as beyond this conference, attend or join the Salesforce Identity Chatter group on success.salesforce. PMs are active there to answer all your questions. You can sign up a DEOG and try out Identity Connect for yourself, or contact your AE for your pilot. And with that, there's a platform keynote today afternoon, so highly encourage you to join that. There's some cool stuff, drones that will be flying around, I guess. So.
Those other sessions are also at salesforceidentity.info.
Yes,
right? If I'm not mistaken.
Go to salesforceidentity.info. It has all the list of sessions. These sessions will also be available on YouTube in a month or so. Okay, if you have questions, please come to the mic at the aisle, and we'll be happy to answer now or afterwards. Okay, go ahead.
Hi. Appreciate it. Really fast-paced, very detailed. My brain's still spinning. So for synchronization with AD, are you doing that constantly by putting triggers on changes on the AD records, or is it scheduled to synchronize records on a periodic basis?
There are a couple of ways the synchronization can be set. One is called live updates, which is we look at the change log of AD every 15 seconds, and if there is a change, then we post it into Salesforce. So that's the live update. You can also do a schedule update, like a nightly job or every 6 hours, based on whatever your requirement is.
Excellent.
The short
Thank
answer
you.
is both.
Yeah, it sure does. And I think you actually answered it with a slide. You also flip the is active bit to false if somebody's been deactivated.
Correct.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you.
And we're even working on freeze
Yeah. Now,
for locked out.
there's a lot of flexibility in the product. So one customer said they had a procedure where they never disable a user in Salesforce. They move it to a different profile. You can do that as well.
Yeah, you can customize the behavior.
Yeah,
Hey,
go ahead.
This is a really good application. We have a couple of situations. One is we use both Active Directory in Windows as well as for internal users, and for external we use Oracle Identity Manager. Does this application work only with the Windows Active Directory, or?
At the moment, it only works with Windows Active Directory as well as AD LDS, which is a form of AD for external users. We have roadmap plans to support other types of LDAP, generic LDAP, but today it's not there.
Okay.
In our house, because we use OID as well, but because that's integrated with Active Directory and Identity Connect is integrated with Active Directory, we're kind of covered, but I can see a more elaborate use case there. So.
Hi, I actually have a few questions because I'm setting this up right now. The first issue is that our HR team is responsible for that kind of first step of adding an employee to our system. So normally they go into ADP first, and from ADP then we would want the process to flow into Active Directory and then into Salesforce. HR is not very, what's the right word?
Flexible.
Okay, I don't have to use the word. Everyone knows where I'm going with that. So we obviously don't want them to touch Active Directory in any way, shape, or form, but we want to get that information into AD. Maybe I'll let you answer the questions one at a time, or I can give you all of them at the same time, depending on how that works. But what is your process there to first get a potential employee, even since you guys do use DreamJob, and I'm sure your whole recruitment process is a lot more integrated to Salesforce than ours currently is?
It is, but not all to that org, and we're really trying to, in IT, kind of centralize that more so that we're starting from AD right now. A lot of things, there's a lot of different integrations that flow into AD, so we kind of take that as the source of truth. But we're, again, trying to kind of turn that around and make that Salesforce org the source of truth. So the idea is that those HR processes would feed in there directly. And that's probably not Identity Connect, but it would be part of Salesforce Identity to either get pushed or more likely to actually go reach out to, like ADP or, in our case, Workday, and pull in that user information, those new hires, and get them into that identity database, and then push everything from there.
Yeah, I would, connect with me after this one. We are right now working on making Salesforce Identity as a provisioning provider. So you can provision accounts into third-party systems as well as accept feeds from ADP and stuff like that for provisioning. So we should connect after this.
Yeah, part of our implementation process got us to the point where we found that ADP is not actually supported for single sign-on if you have less than 1,000 users or your account is older than 2 years. One of you probably knows me, actually, because I've been on the phone quite a bit over the last few months. So we are considering Workday because of that problem. But I didn't actually realize that Identity was able to provision, centrally out to those various systems, because my next question is going to be, what application are you using to actually set up users in Identity? Because what I would ultimately, in Active Directory, what I'd ultimately like to be able to do is enter a team name, and that team name then assigns them the correct Active Directory groups, and then those Active Directory groups then feed into Identity and then to Salesforce to give them the proper profile, proper permission set.
So currently in our architecture, it's actually an Oracle BPEL integration that pulls data into Active Directory from another Salesforce org, into which everybody kind of gets their new hire. And we're hoping soon, especially with the spring release, there's going to be some features where we're really going to, and BPEL needs to go for a couple of reasons. The DSML support in AD is going away, and a couple other things, but we really want to replace that integration with having that Aloha org actually pull that data in itself.
Is there anyone behind me?
And yes, Workday's SSO implementation is a lot more elaborate and better
So
than
there
ADP's.
is already integration from Workday into Salesforce created by Workday, where when a user is created in Workday, automatically that user can be created in Salesforce. So that's something you could utilize.
There's a lot of nice features there.
Yesterday, yeah. I will save the rest of my questions for our post-session conversation or post them to the chatter feed. And thank you guys.
Okay.
We should probably give up the stage if there's no more. One more.
One more question.
Sure.
What's the price for a license for Identity Connect?
So it's an add-on product to any of your Salesforce user licenses. It's not a user license, it's a add-on license, and it's $1 per user per month, add-on to any of your user licenses.
$1 per user per month. Does it work with platform licenses?
Yes. Platform, chatter, any kind of user license you have on Salesforce.
Yeah, you basically already own Salesforce Identity. Identity Connect is just a small licensing add-on.
Thank you.
Great.
All right, thank you everyone, and enjoy the rest of the day and the week.
Okay. If anybody else still has questions, I'll be happy to take them offline.